need today's results because your relationship can't continue down the path you're on.
Problems with trust, and it's very difficult for me because I love him with all my heart, and I would never do anything to betray his trust, ever.
I've had issues with trust. I've had issues with people cheating on me. One thing after another, it was things showing me that, can I trust her? Best friends. We tried dating at that point in time. Unfortunately, I was in a bad relationship. I was in a bad marriage, and so was she. We remained friends. We remained friends for 5 years, and then I was happy. I was thrilled. I was happy I was around her again.
Ms. Strickland, how did you feel when you first met?
I felt like I had found my best friend. I found a part of my soul that had been missing.
Sometimes a single test doesn't just reveal truth, it rewrites destiny. In Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, one DNA test shattered silence, exposed betrayal, and reminded the world that truth changes everything. In a world where family, loyalty, and love collide under the bright lights of justice, the courtroom becomes more than a stage. It becomes a mirror of human truth. Judge Lauren Lake stands at the intersection between heartbreak and healing, where DNA tests reveal not only who a father is, but who we are when faced with the ultimate question: what is justice and what is love? The story of two cousins both want this woman and her child isn't just about infidelity or science. It's about the fragile relationship between law and justice, where every piece of evidence carries the weight of a human heart. It's about choices made in moments of weakness and the lifelong consequences they bring. Inside this courtroom, tears and truth coexist. Here, every word spoken is recorded like testimony in the grand trial of life. Lauren Lake's courtroom has always been a sanctuary for truth seekers, for those who dare to confront what others hide from. Her calm authority isn't just rooted in law, it's grounded in empathy, and in this case, empathy would be tested to its limits. Two men, bound by blood as cousins, stood before her, both claiming to be the father of one woman's child. It wasn't just a matter of biology. It was about betrayal, pride, and the unspoken concept of justice in jurisprudence. That justice isn't just about what's legal, but what's right. The courtroom filled with tension that day, not just from the litigants, but from generations of pain. This wasn't merely a question of paternity. It was an echo of broken trust, of moral consequences whispered in family gatherings, and of a truth waiting to surface. The woman at the center of the storm admitted her mistake. Her voice trembled, not from guilt alone, but from the realization that one night of weakness had become a lifelong story told before millions. She didn't hide behind excuses. She stood before Judge Lauren Lake and faced the truth, and that act alone became the most powerful testimony of the day. The cousins, Nathan and Cordell, once shared childhood laughter and family dinners. They grew up like brothers, bound by more than lineage. But as adults, the same bloodline became a battlefield. When love turned into rivalry and loyalty became suspicion, family ties began to unravel. The DNA test became the only path to closure. Yet, as any listener of the Truth Changes Everything podcast would say, the truth isn't just data in a lab. It's the emotional earthquake that follows. For people who regret taking a DNA test, it's never the result itself that hurts, but what it reveals about relationships, deception, and faith. In this case, the DNA test was not only scientific evidence, it was the ultimate confession, one that no human voice could deny or distort. Judge Lauren Lake understood this. As she often reminds her courtroom and her viewers, the law may define the rules, but justice defines the outcome. Through her years on the bench, she's seen how the legal stage, much like the Game-Changing Attorney podcast describes, demands not only knowledge of statutes, but mastery of human emotion. Law alone cannot repair betrayal. Only accountability can. And in the fragile intersection between law and love, justice is less about punishment and more about clarity. As the testimony unfolded, The courtroom became a living example of adverse inference in the Evidence Act, the principle that silence, omission, or deceit can speak louder than truth itself. Every hesitation, every half answer, every tear told a story of its own. The human heart is the most complicated witness, and Judge Lauren Lake knew how to cross-examine it with compassion. At one point, she looked at the young woman who had confessed to sleeping with both cousins, and instead of judgment, she offered reflection. That moment captured what law professors call the concept of justice in jurisprudence, the belief that moral fairness transcends the letter of the law. Lauren Lake reminded the courtroom that truth, no matter how painful, is the only foundation on which healing can stand. Behind every courtroom case lies a larger human question. What drives people to cheat, to hide, to betray those they love? The answer, as found in countless DNA test cheating stories and the Divorce Course podcast episodes, is never just about lust or opportunity. It's about emotional voids, the spaces where love should have been, where communication failed, where loneliness found its moment of weakness. But as the Celebrate Recovery testimonies teach, redemption begins when truth is no longer feared. When a person stands up and admits, "I was wrong," something sacred happens, not in the courtroom, but in the soul. And that was exactly what happened in Lauren Lake's court that day. The woman at the center of this case didn't defend her mistake with excuses. She faced it head on, acknowledging that one night's decision had placed two men and one innocent child in the crossfire of truth. Her courage didn't erase her error, but it transformed her story from shame to strength. Judge Lake, ever the teacher of truth, reminded everyone that the courtroom isn't just a place for legal decisions. It's a classroom of life. Every verdict carries a moral. Every DNA test result carries a lesson. And every broken family carries a warning for others watching. In her calm yet firm tone, Lauren Lake often says that justice isn't just about proof. It's about purpose. She treats every case not as a headline, but as a human heart under examination. The audience may tune in for the drama, but they leave with wisdom about integrity, forgiveness, and accountability. In this case, when the DNA test was revealed, the result didn't just solve a mystery, it redefined the meaning of family. For one cousin, it meant heartbreak. For another, redemption. For the woman, it meant closure. And for the child, it meant identity. The test became the evidence that not only determined legal fatherhood, but also restored a measure of moral order to a family divided by betrayal. And that's what paternity court has always symbolized. A modern reflection of the supreme. Court's deepest ideals, truth above all. Whether it's a divorce case, a custody battle, or a paternity test, the principle remains the same. The law must serve humanity, not the other way around. Even as the gavel struck and the courtroom exhaled, the lesson lingered. Truth changes everything. It changes relationships, reputations, and realities. It may break a family's silence, but it also opens the door to healing. Many who've taken a DNA test can relate. People regret taking them not because they exposed lies, but because they forced them to face emotions long buried. Yet regret fades, clarity remains. And as Lauren Lake reminds everyone, clarity is the first step toward freedom. In a world where social media thrives on half-truths and filtered lives, the courtroom remains one of the last sacred spaces where truth still matters. Here, the word evidence isn't abstract. It's lived, breathed, and felt. Each testimony becomes a reflection of society's larger struggle with trust, morality, and consequence. This episode also highlights an often overlooked truth about family law, that child support, adoption stories, and custody disputes aren't just legal battles. They're moral reckonings. Behind every file number is a human being praying for justice. Behind every paternity test is a child longing to know where they belong. And that's why Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom isn't just a show. It's a mission. It's a daily reminder that justice, when served with empathy, can heal more than it hurts. It can teach families how to rebuild after truth has stripped away illusion. The Divorce Course podcast once explored a similar theme. How truth, though painful, becomes the seed of recovery. The moment we stop hiding is the moment we start healing. And that's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about who fathered a child. It's about who chose to face the truth. As the judgment was read and the truth revealed, the air grew still. No shouting, no chaos, just silence followed by relief. The result didn't just determine paternity, it ended denial. And in that silence, there was peace. Not because everyone won, but because everyone finally knew. Truth, once spoken, doesn't need to shout. The silence in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom that day wasn't emptiness. It was transformation. It was the stillness that follows a storm, when truth has done its work and the heart finally exhales. What happens after a DNA test reveals the truth is never just about the law, it's about the human condition. Because even though the science is simple, the consequences are anything but. For the cousins who stood before Judge Lake, the test didn't only answer a question, it reshaped their entire definition of brotherhood. They had entered her courtroom as family, but left as something different. One a father, the other a man, forced to confront regret. It's a scene that plays out not only in courtrooms, but in the lives of countless people who discover that truth, while liberating also demands accountability. Judge Lauren Lake understands that in every DNA test, there are people who regret taking it, not because they didn't want the truth, but because the truth arrived too late. In many ways, it's like a celebrate recovery testimony. The truth hurts first, then heals. And while science can uncover the genetic code of life, it cannot heal the emotional code of love and betrayal. That healing begins only when one accepts responsibility. In her wisdom, Judge Lake often reminds her courtroom that justice doesn't start with the gavel. It starts with honesty. And that's where this story takes a profound turn. Because this wasn't just another DNA test cheating story. It was a modern parable about the relationship between law and justice. How they must walk together, not as adversaries, but as partners seeking truth. The concept of justice in jurisprudence has long debated this balance. Is justice about strict application of the law, or about the pursuit of moral fairness? In this episode, Lauren Lake embodied that ancient debate. Her courtroom became a reflection of what Aristotle once described as equity, the idea that true justice adapts itself to the human heart. Here, the law confirmed biological truth, but Lauren Lake's words confirmed human worth. When she looked at the young woman who had betrayed two men, she didn't condemn her. She corrected her. You can't rewrite the past, she said, but you can rebuild what you've broken, one truth at a time. And that is the real lesson of this case. Truth changes everything. Across podcasts like the Divorce Course podcast and the Game Changing Attorney podcast, legal experts talk about how courtroom truths transform families, reputations, and futures. But in paternity court, the transformation happens in real time, in front of millions of eyes. Each verdict becomes both evidence and example, showing how law, when applied with empathy, can restore order to chaos. Lauren Lake has become more than a judge. She's a mentor in the art of confronting truth. Her rulings aren't just legal decisions, they're life lessons disguised as judgments. And in this particular case, she revealed the truth that would either unite or destroy a family. The DNA test said one cousin was the father. The other, heartbroken, was left to face the emotional debris of betrayal. Yet in that heartbreak lies something beautiful. Clarity. Because once the truth is known, even pain becomes purpose. The human spirit, though wounded, begins to rebuild. And in that rebuilding lies the true power of justice. That's the irony of truth. Those who fear it are usually those who need it most. And when they finally face it, they realize it was never meant to destroy them, only to free them. In the words of a guest on the Truth Changes Everything podcast, truth doesn't break families, lies do. Throughout the courtroom, every eye was wet, every heart humbled. What unfolded next wasn't written in any evidence act or Supreme Court ruling. It was written in the silent forgiveness between people who realized they'd hurt each other enough. The law had done its job. Now the heart had to do the rest. Lauren Lake's courtroom that day symbolized the delicate dance between intellect and empathy, between the statute and the soul. Every courtroom in America operates under the principle of adverse inference in the Evidence Act, that silence or omission can imply guilt. But Lauren Lake extends that principle into life itself. Silence in relationships breeds distance. Omission breeds distrust. The law applies to hearts too. And in the story of these two cousins, we see exactly that. One man's silence allowed suspicion to grow. One woman's omission allowed betrayal to bloom. But it was only through confrontation, through speaking truth, that freedom returned. This wasn't just a courtroom episode. It was an adoption story in its own right. Not of a child, but of truth. When the truth was finally claimed, it gave everyone a new beginning. In fact, many viewers who later tuned in to Paternity Court full episodes saw their own lives reflected in this case. It reminded them of their own secrets, regrets, or denials. The things they never wanted to surface. But what Judge Lake teaches is universal. The truth is never the enemy. It's the mirror. In family law, every verdict touches on child support, custody, and lineage. But beneath those legal words lies a deeper narrative, one of identity and belonging. Who am I? Who are you to me? What binds us when blood divides us? In that courtroom, Judge Lake didn't just announce results. She restored identity. The child at the center of the case would grow up knowing exactly who his father was. Not as a rumor, but as a fact. And that fact, though born from pain, would protect him from the confusion that secrecy breeds. In her final words, Judge Lauren Lake reminded both men of something timeless. Family isn't just biology, it's responsibility. That one sentence summarized the moral essence of the entire case. Because the law can determine paternity, but only character can determine fatherhood. As the cameras stopped rolling, the reality remained. Lives had been changed forever, but so had perspectives. The cousins, though scarred, would carry forward an understanding that no relationship, family or otherwise, can survive without truth. The emotional gravity of this episode became a point of discussion on several legal and ethical platforms. From the Game-Changing Attorney podcast to the Divorce Course podcast, where professionals explored how family disputes illuminate the living spirit of justice. Lawyers debated how the concept of justice in jurisprudence evolves when the courtroom becomes a place not only for evidence, but also for emotional restoration. What makes Judge Lauren Lake's approach so profound is that she doesn't see these cases as entertainment. She sees them as opportunities for transformation. Each episode is a celebrate recovery testimony in disguise, where ordinary people confess their deepest mistakes, face their consequences, and begin again. It's justice not as punishment, but as redemption. In many ways, Paternity Court embodies the very soul of the Supreme Court's mission, to uphold truth, equality, and the sanctity of family. Yet, unlike traditional courts, Lauren Lake's bench becomes a stage for emotional healing. Where others see defendants, she sees broken hearts. Where others see evidence, she sees opportunity for redemption. When she read the DNA results that day, her tone softened. The verdict wasn't a victory. It was an unveiling. For the cousin who was not the father, it was a moment of grief, yes, but also of grace. Because now he knew. Now he could heal. And that's the silent beauty of truth. Even when it hurts, it heals more than it harms. The audience that day didn't just witness a verdict. They witnessed transformation. They saw a man's pride collapse into humility, a woman's guilt transform into courage, and a family's broken ties start to mend under the weight of truth. And perhaps that is why people regret taking DNA tests, not because they don't want to know, but because once they do, they can never unknow. The truth removes illusions permanently. It exposes motives, reveals fears, and forces growth. But as the Truth Changes Everything podcast often reminds its listeners, The moment you stop fearing truth is the moment you start living free. The moral weight of this episode extended far beyond the courtroom. On social platforms and discussion boards, people began sharing their own cheating stories, their own DNA test regrets, and their own battles with truth. What started as an episode became a national conversation about integrity and self-accountability, and in that, Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom transcended television. It became a ministry of truth. Because in the end, the DNA test didn't just prove who the father was, it proved that truth still matters. It reminded viewers that deception may protect comfort, but only honesty protects peace. It's the same principle echoed across every Divorce Course podcast episode. When you strip away lies, the only thing left is what's real. And though what's real may be painful, it's also the only place where love can grow again. So, what is the true legacy of this case? It's not the result on paper, it's the understanding it left behind. That justice is not about perfection, but about confession. That law is not about revenge, but restoration. And that the family, though fragile, can survive anything, except silence. In the weeks following the episode, fans of Paternity Court and students of law alike discussed how Judge Lauren Lake personified modern jurisprudence, where evidence meets empathy. She reminded the world that truth doesn't destroy relationships, it rebuilds them honestly, and perhaps that's why people keep tuning in, not to see drama unfold, but to witness humanity at its rawest. Because every time Judge Lauren Lake calls for the results, the world collectively holds its breath, not to hear a verdict, but to feel a truth that always, without fail, changes everything. Every story that unfolds before Judge Lauren Lake carries the same heartbeat. The human struggle between truth and denial, justice and emotion, love and consequence. But few episodes have captured the fragility of the human soul, like two cousins, both want this woman and her child. It's a story that begins in secrecy and ends in silence, the kind of silence only truth can create, because when the DNA test confirmed what the heart already suspected, the courtroom didn't erupt in chaos, it fell into reverence. The gavel was not a symbol of victory that day, but of surrender. Surrender to reality, surrender to consequence, surrender to healing. The results were clear. The child's father was one cousin. The other, betrayed and broken, had to watch the truth dismantle everything he once believed about family, loyalty, and love. Yet in that moment of heartbreak, something sacred occurred. Justice quietly found its way home. Judge Lauren Lake didn't just read the DNA results. She read the emotions behind them. Her compassion was as precise as the evidence she held in her hands. She understood that no matter how painful, truth changes everything. And that's why she treats every case not as entertainment, but as an education in humanity. The courtroom that day became more than a legal stage. It became a living embodiment of the relationship between law and justice. For law alone could determine biological paternity, but justice, deeper, spiritual justice, could only be found in forgiveness. As the air settled and tears fell freely, Judge Lake spoke softly about accountability, about the choices that lead us here, and about the redemption that follows confession. She reminded both men that no matter what the Evidence Act may record, the true test of fatherhood lies beyond paperwork. It lives in consistency, protection, and presence. For many watching, the episode mirrored their own lives. Some remembered taking DNA tests that changed their families forever. Others recalled divorce cases where evidence became ammunition. But everyone, regardless of circumstance, understood one thing, that when truth walks into the room, denial has to leave. It's why podcasts like the Game-Changing Attorney podcast and the Divorce Course podcast often highlight cases like this one, because they reveal the living tension between moral conscience and legal consequence. They remind us that jurisprudence is not just the study of law, it's the study of people. flawed, emotional, hopeful people, seeking justice in a world built on imperfection. In this story, adverse inference wasn't just a legal principle, it was life itself. Silence had already spoken louder than words. The woman's hesitation, her delayed confession, her guilt, all were forms of evidence. But when she finally faced Judge Lake and owned her truth, the entire courtroom shifted. For the first time, truth didn't sound like accusation. It sounded like liberation. And that is why Judge Lauren Lake's Paternity Court is more than a television show. It's a weekly reflection of humanity's oldest truth, that the search for justice always begins with the courage to tell the truth. In the aftermath of the verdict, the families involved stood on the edge of new beginnings. For one cousin, the truth meant responsibility, a lifetime of being a father, not just by biology, but by action. For the other, it meant releasing resentment and finding peace in reality. And for the woman, who had once believed that confession would destroy her, it meant freedom. Because as many Celebrate Recovery testimonies have revealed, the moment you stop hiding is the moment you begin to heal. She stood before Judge Lake that day, no longer defined by her mistake, but by her honesty. She had faced the concept of justice, in jurisprudence firsthand, not the distant academic version written in books, but the living justice that breathes inside the heart when truth finally comes to light. Her story became an adoption of truth, a reminder that even when we cannot undo the past, we can still adopt honesty as our future. And perhaps that is what Judge Lauren Lake has built her entire courtroom philosophy upon, that law is not an abstract power meant to punish. It is a compassionate force designed to restore. Justice in her hands feels less like judgment and more like therapy. Her courtroom mirrors the wisdom of the Supreme Court itself, that the ultimate purpose of the law is to uphold truth, protect innocence, and balance the scales of morality.